So first of all, it was pretty much in every other ad I saw on Instagram. Now, that does make sense because my timeline is filled with books and cute puppies and kittens and cute cafes that I want to visit and write and read at one day. But this book came up a lot. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. Now, those heavily marketed books can be a hit or a miss, but when I eventually got very curious to know where this book was coming from and where all the hype was coming from, I read the synopsis and I'm not gonna lie, I was very intrigued. And that's the second reason why I decided to pick up a copy. When it comes to books I choose to read, there's often some correlation to what's happening in my actual life, or let's say something I just watched that's now stuck in my head. In this case, I had just finished watching the latest season of The Last of Us, and I was definitely in my feels about it. Because a particular relationship resembled Ellie and Joel's relationship in the show, and I think that's why I ended up getting really invested in Silver Elite right off the bat. And if you're into secret psychic powers, elite military training, and messy emotional entanglements, this one might be a book for you, with a few caveats that we'll talk about. So, what is Silver Elite by Dani Francis all about? Well, the story is set in North America 150 years into the future. The continent has been ravaged by a toxin that killed some and gave others special abilities. The people who lived through it are divided into two subgroups. There are the primes who are not affected by the toxin and who do not have any psychic powers. And then there are the modified people, or the mods, M-O-D-S, who do have psychic abilities because of the toxin. Mods are controlled by the government, which in the book is called the Company. Mods are looked down upon, mistreated, feared for sure, seen as abominations, and turned into slaves because their powers are seen as too dangerous. Our main character is named Wren Darlington, which immediately reminded me of Pretty Little Liars, and how Wren, spoiler alert, got turned into a diamond necklace in the end. But that's a different story for a different time. So Wren Darlington is a mod, or a modified person, and not only that, because while some mods have only one or two abilities, she's actually got 4, one of them being extremely dangerous to those she could choose to use it against. Plus, while you can tell that a person is a mod because of their silver veins, which you can kind of see on the cover of the book, Wren doesn't have that feature, which makes her a real liability because she can live in this world completely undetected and without the Company's suspecting a thing, so she can basically be hiding in plain sight and nobody's gonna have a clue. Wren lives on, I guess you could say, on a farm with her uncle, Jim, and Jim reminded me of Joel. It's not that they're described to be similar or anything. Maybe it's more so their personalities, but when I read Jim's parts in the book, I just ended up visualizing Joel for some reason. Joel from The Last of Us. There was something about Wren and Jim's relationship that really made me draw a parallel between them and Ellie and Joel, which is still hard to talk about after what happens on the show. If you know, you know. Of course, they're all very different people, but there was just a vibe I picked up. I'm curious to know if anybody else felt that way. Anyway, what ends up propelling the story in Silver Elite forward is the death of Uncle Jim, because he gets executed by the oppressive regime. As a result, Wren is forced into the Silver Block program. Silver Block, which basically trains the best of the best to become, I guess you can think of them as secret agents for the company. And since the company hates mods and wants to control them, and Wren is a mod, but can't tell anyone, or she's going to lose either her life, her freedom, or both. That is why she ends up in a pretty big pickle. Among all the training scenes and Wren trying to balance between hiding who she is, figuring herself out as a trainee, and wanting to help carry out a rebellion from the inside, there's also a romantic subplot. Wren gets tangled into a complicated situationship with Cross Redden, R-E-D-D-E-N, Redden, who is not only Wren's commanding officer at the Silver Block, but is also the son of General Merrick Redden, who basically rules the continent, and in the book is positioned as the biggest mod hater. As you can imagine, Wren should not be into Cross, because having any positive feelings toward him or his family would mean betraying herself and her fellow mods. Plus, it's not like Cross could bring Wren home for dinner if anyone found out what she is. All in all, it's a very sticky situation. If you wanted a general idea of what Silver Elite is like, I would describe it as a pretty fast-paced, spicy, high-stakes enemies to lovers, with things like training sequences, with a combination of some more predictable reveals and some surprising twists. The story definitely has its flaws, but it did pull me out of a reading slump, and I can definitely see myself reading book 2 whenever it comes out. Okay, First of all, this book was marketed as a spicy Katniss slash The Hunger Games story, which I don't think was totally accurate or actually accurate at all. Because to me, The Hunger Games is a true modern dystopian because it gets really deep into the political aspects, human psychology, human nature, and all of these very heavy topics. In Silver Elite, however, the dystopian element was pretty surface level. You learn that there is a power divide, and you get to see the evil government in action, but these aspects of the story aren't as developed or explored as deeply for the story to read as a true dystopian to me. There was also a much bigger focus on the romantic plot and the spicy scenes than on the political games and how that affects the society, the power struggles, and Wren personally, which in and of itself is definitely not a bad thing, but it doesn't scream dystopian to me, if you know what I mean. Silver Elite honestly read more like, I don't know, steamy sci-fi military romance than a dystopian novel, which again is fine. I just wish it was marketed as that because I read a bunch of reviews and this is one of the things that threw people off the most when they started reading the book. I didn't mind Wren as a protagonist, but there were two things that stood out to me that I felt were weaknesses. First of all, losing Jim should have been a huge deal that then shaped most, if not every decision that Wren made from that point onward. But curiously enough, that's not what happened. We did get some flashbacks and mentions of Jim throughout the story, but if the author's intention was to portray Wren as being devastated by Jim's death, at least to me, it didn't fully read that way. Another thing is the push and pull between Wren and Cross. Wren is presented as a very moral character who sticks to her beliefs, but the fact that she gives into Cross sort of cancels all of that out. At the end of the book, there is an attempt to resolve this issue when we learn that Cross is not exactly who we were told he was, but at the same time that doesn't cancel out the fact that he's related to the general who's been making the mods' lives a living hell, or that he's been working for an organization that's been hurting mods for a very long time. It is a romance, so I get why Wren can't resist Cross, and it wouldn't be a very good romance if, well, they never got together. And I'm honestly not going to lie, those scenes between Wren and Cross bickering and eventually falling for each other were definitely fun to read, but then as a result, Wren comes off as not being as strong in her convictions as we're made to think, and that made me judge Wren as a character just a little bit. There's also a really stupid decision Wren makes related to the burn scars on her leg that kind of made me roll my eyes as I was reading. Like, girl, you're in so much danger and you want to stay under the radar as much as possible. social and political commentary to be layered over all of the romance, the spice, and the action, and this is what Silver Elite was lacking, in my opinion. Not to say that it's not going to come in the future books, but I feel like there had to be more space carved out for these essential elements of dystopia in this book. On a positive note, I found myself zooming through this book, which, by the way, is not a short book by any means, because I found myself really wanting to know what was going to happen. I think it was mostly the element of Wren being in enemies' lands, so to speak, and having to hide her identity while being surrounded by people who could at least imprison her or likely kill her at any moment if they found out what she was. All of that tension made the book really fun to read. There was also one twist and death associated with that twist that really threw me off in a good way, so there's at least one surprising twist that you can expect. I'm definitely planning to read the sequel when it comes out, but I'm also really hoping that the story is going to shift its focus from Cross is so hot, I can't stop myself to, well, like actual world building, fleshing out the politics, and exploring some deeper themes. Like, we can still have some of the Cross Redden is so hot moments, but there needs to be a better balance between that and the other things. There's also a very interesting conspiracy that has to do with this book because nobody knows who Dani Francis is. So she does have an Instagram, but there are no photos of her face. We don't know if she's released any other books. People suspect that she could potentially be another author who's well known and who maybe writes in a different genre, and maybe Dani Francis is a pen name. Other people say that maybe Dani Francis is not one single person, but maybe it's a group of authors, and Silver Elite is a collaboration between them. Other people say that Dani Francis doesn't even exist, and that the book was actually written by AI, and this is a project of the publishing company, like a little experiment to see if they can write a full book with AI, have somebody edit it, release it to the public, market the heck out of it, and then have it be extremely successful. Now, all of these things that I just mentioned are just rumors, and at least as of this moment, when I'm filming this video, I don't think there's been any confirmation either way, but I think it definitely adds to the popularity of the book because as more books come out, I think, well, at least I'll feel that way, I'm going to want to see who this author is, to find out exactly who's behind the story, and whether the author is very shy and she doesn't want any publicity, or, like I said, it's an author who writes in a very different genre and she wanted conspiracy and that's what actually happens. I'm curious to see what ends up